Does anybody have any question on what we've talked about so far before we come back to Ben? Ah, I see two fingers from Jennifer. So you got two questions.
Oh, just one question.
Okay.
There was the passage where it talked about Christ, but then you also talked about, they mentioned the Antichrist.
Mhm.
So, like, who is the Antichrist? You explained that Christ we would see as the Bob, but you didn't mention who they thought the Antichrist was.
That was Yahya Azam.
Was who?
Mirza Yahya.
Oh,
Yahya.
okay. Okay. You just didn't explain that. So, okay.
Well, you got to do something.
Okay, but if that was Mirza Yahya, then why was the Christ the Bob? You know, like Mirza Yahya came, like wasn't really, he was associated, yes, with the Bob, but more with Baha'u'llah.
Mhm.
So
Durham, do you have an answer to this? You know the Islamic tradition better than anybody.
Well, I could be wrong, stand corrected that, you see, the return of Christ, sometimes it refers to the Bab and sometimes it refers to the Baha'u'llah also. It's not only the Bab.
Okay.
Mirza Yahya was the Antichrist in relation to Baha'u'llah.
right, right.
Okay?
Mhm.
That's why this is the Antichrist of Baha'u'llah.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mark, Heather has her hand up.
Yeah, I just saw your comment
Okay.
there. So, okay, go ahead, Heather. You're muted.
Steve's talking about sciences, different types of science, Gnostic science.
Mhm.
Is there a list or an idea of how this science is the same or different than our idea of science? Is it anything that would follow a scientific method? I was just wondering.
There's quite a distinction between what we think of as sciences and what the Gnostic sciences are. In Islam, the sciences were associated in some direct way with the revelation, with the Quran, with the Hadith. So you have people who are specialists in various aspects of the Quran, for instance. They know all about the different versions. There are many, many tiny little changes in several different editions of the Quran. There are people who are specialists in figuring out what the circumstances were, as best we can tell, about each particular thing that was revealed. There are specialists in the traditions. So they're the ones who figured out which of the thousands and thousands of traditions were likely to actually be true. There was a real factory for a long time that created what seemed like good traditions that really were much, much later, but attributed back to the companions of Muhammad, for instance. So they had to be able to make decisions about each particular tradition to see whether it was sound or unsound. Then there are all the legal aspects of the Sharia, the way that you live your life. And that gets quite picayune. Well, there are dozens of other associated sciences, but they're all typically religious in nature.
Okay.
So, but they are, I mean, they do follow meticulous rules, but it's not the scientific tradition that we're used to. And there was, you know, there generations upon generations of these people who studied what had been done previously and then decided that they would make a slight modification in some way, that kind of thing. Does that give you a
Yeah,
sense?
okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Durham?
You see, the word sciences in this context does not relate to any technical fields. So to explain, in Arabic, science is ilm and science is ulum, okay? They're all, as you mentioned, they're all related to religion from different aspects.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that when the term science is used here, it's nothing to do with technical stuff.
That's exactly right. Okay, Linda O'Neill.
Okay, on this same question, my impression in the Baha'i writings is that sciences mean simply knowledge. Would you say that's correct? Various types of knowledge or various realms of knowledge?
I think that's fair enough.
Yeah. Mark, can I comment on this? I'm Harold. I think it makes way more sense out of the world's religious history to interpret science as body of knowledge. There was a time when science, included cooking or where metals could be found or how to make a bow or how to make, weave something. So all bodies of knowledge. I dug in a little bit to the Solomonic wisdom tradition, and some of that literature that didn't get in the Old Testament talks about sciences and their bodies of knowledge. So I think that's the use that's made in Baha'i writings, broad. In fact, that's the oldest meaning of science, body of knowledge. And the body could be very small, or it could be very informal. It could be pre-written. It doesn't mean anything is written down. It means somebody knew how to do something. Anyway, that broad concept, I think, is the one most consistent with the Baha'i use of that word. Also, in the future, there will be new spiritual sciences, we're told by Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha. I don't think we have a clue what that could mean, except that they would be bodies of knowledge. And so I think what's in common to the modern sense of science and the old traditional sense is that they're bodies of knowledge. It's a question of what method what degree of math is there in them, or empirical methods are used. But any body of knowledge is a science, is in the broad sense. Anyway, sorry to be so windy, but I used to get very confused by that until I came up with this broad interpretation. Then a lot of things made more sense to me, both in the Baha'i writings and in ancient cultures that talk about sciences too.
Mark, could I add something, or are we too late?
Well, I'm just
Okay.
realizing that Belinda had her hand up first, and then I've got a comment from Wayne in the chat that we should address. And then
Okay.
we'll come to you, Jack, okay? So
Sure.
Belinda first. You're muted at this point. There we go.
Hi. I was going to say the same thing Harold did, that science is, in this context, means a body of knowledge. And what we call science is one particular body of knowledge, the physical sciences, where you use certain methods, the scientific method of observation and experimentation, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I had come up with the same thing Harold did. That was all I was going to say. It's a body of knowledge, and there are many. Thanks.
Okay, so, thank you. So Wayne was saying that I'd mentioned at one point that the Bob is considered to be the return of Jesus. And then again, it is said that the Bob was considered to be the return of John the Baptist, if my mind serves me right. Can you clarify the difference between these two opinions, if I may? Well, it's interesting that the Bob's role was similar to John the Baptist in the sense that he was the forerunner. He was the one who announced the coming of one who was greater than himself. But there's a difference between those two in the sense that John the Baptist was not considered to be a full manifestation of God for whatever reason. whereas the Bab was. He was initiating his own independent revelation, which John the Baptist did not. So there's a parallel to a certain extent, but not all the way. Okay, does that answer your question, Wayne? Do you have a follow-up on that?
Well, that's understandable. I was just a little, whatever it is, about the commentary, right? And so I just wanted to hear a little more about it.
Okay. Is that sufficient, or?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Thanks, because then you make mention that John the Baptist was not considered a manifestation, and so for that matter, the Bab, who was considered a manifestation, was at a higher station, so he could be referred to as Jesus.
Yeah.
More or less what you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's understandable. No, thanks.
Okay. Now we're back at Jack, right?
Boy, it's tempting to go into that other.
Don't do that. What was your original question?
I just wanted to, it's not a question, it's a comment.
Okay.
Something you said and something Veram said about knowledge in Islam. I can't say it with the proper accent, ilm and ulum, right? Knowledge in Islam originally is all connected to the Quran. So, who were the knowledgeable people in Islam? They were the clerics. That's why they're called the ulama, the people who know something. And the other point is that the enemy of the Bab, Karim Khan Kermani, he bragged about knowing all of these sciences, like there were 12 or 13. Baha'u'llah said he was, the title of one of his books, Knowledge, Guidance for the Ignorant, or something like that, was just, redolent with his egotism. But that was the idea before you could do tafsir, exegesis, or tawil or tawil, if you pronounce it like in Persian. You had to know all of these things. You had to know grammar. You had to know fiqh, legal studies, on and on and on. And unless you knew all of these things, you weren't supposed to open your mouth. You weren't qualified to say anything, because you wouldn't be able to understand all of the ins and outs, the zahir meaning, the batin meaning, the inner meaning, the outer meaning, all of that. So that was the big deal about learning all of these different sciences, which supposedly qualified you to understand the Quran. Anyway, that's, and don't forget, the ulama, the clerics, were probably the only class, in addition to the aristocrats, who were literate.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't even bother to teach women how to read or write or even to count, if you can imagine that. So not everybody, if we're talking about the Babi Baha'i dispensation, not everybody in Iranian society was even literate. So not only did the ulama command the people, I mean, it was a church state, the Shah and the clerics, they basically ruled the country, but they were the only people who knew something about anything. I mean, in literal terms, which was, according to them, before the development of secular science, the only thing that was worth knowing about was the Quran. And of course, fundamentalist Muslims still believe the same thing today. Anyway, just wanted to.
Okay, let's charge ahead, because I'm only halfway through and we only have an hour left. So I want to turn our attention to the Bezels of Wisdom, the Fusus al-Hikam, which is the second most important work of Ibn Arabi. It's been translated into English at least 3 times. First as The Wisdom of the Prophets by Titus Burckhardt in 1975. The Bezels of Wisdom by R.W.J. Austin in 1980. And more recently is The Ringstones of Wisdom by Dagley in 2004. So this particular book was written during Ibn Arabi's final years in Damascus. It was intended to be a synthesis of his spiritual doctrine. It is the most widely read and most frequently commented upon of Ibn Arabi's writings. Now, the term Bezel refers to the setting in which a gem engraved with one's name is set in a seal ring. So Baha'u'llah and the Bab both had these. The settings in which Ibn Arabi has placed his spiritual wisdom are the lives of 27 prophets mentioned in the Quran. He explains how each prophet is a visible manifestation of the wisdom of one of the divine names. Although Ibn Arabi claims divine inspiration for several of his works, including the Futuhat that we just talked about, the Fusus was the only one that was handed to him in a vision by the prophet, which Jack mentioned at the beginning. And so this is number 16. So let me go back to screen sharing here and pull up 16. There we go. Now, okay, so I don't know if I've missed anybody. Oh, how about Lisa? Are you able to read at this point, Lisa?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. 16.
I saw the apostle of God in a visitation granted to me during the latter part of the month of Muharram in the year 627, which is December 1229 AD, in the city of Damascus. He had in his hand a book, and he said to me, "This is the book of the Bezels of wisdom. Take it and bring it to men that they might benefit from it." I said, "All obedience is due to God and his apostle. It shall be as we are commanded." I therefore carried out the wish, made pure my intention, and devoted my purpose to the publishing of this book, just as the apostle had laid down, without any addition or subtraction.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, it's been translated into English several times, but according to Chittick, each time with mixed results. Even the best of these, according to him, by Austin, leaves a great deal to be desired, even on the level of conveying accurately the sense of the text. Now, I have to say that this particular criticism of Chittick's was written before Kaner Dagli's translation, The Ringstones of Wisdom, was published in 2004. My own impression is that this translation, which is accompanied by extensive explanations of the numerous difficult terms and passages, is far better than the other two. But the problem isn't entirely the translator's fault. This summary of Ibn Arabi's mystical teachings is composed in a style which is very concentrated and condensed, making it a particularly difficult work to translate into another language in a way which makes some sort of sense to the non-Arabic speaking and non-Muslim reader. Even in the original Arabic, much of the text is unintelligible without detailed commentary, which none of the translators have provided. That's Chittick again. It's not true of Dagli's version. Its contents are presented in such an elusive and undifferentiated form that it is impossible to grasp the meaning without detailed explanation. However, due to its manageable size, which is 180 pages in the printed edition, it's manageable, at least in size, when compared with the Meccan Revelations. As well as its status as a synopsis, this book provides the student with a unique opportunity to come to grips with his teachings as a whole, which is why there's so much interest in this particular book. For this reason, more than 100 commentaries have been written over the centuries in an attempt to mine its dense riches. The Japanese scholar Toshihiko Izutsu maintains that these commentaries constitute a whole history of Islamic philosophy in themselves. So let's step back for a second and say, what was Ibn Arabi's goal in all of these writings? Why did he spend so much of his life committing his mystical experiences to paper? We've already come across one of his reasons. During the solemn ceremony that took place in the imaginal realm in the presence of Muhammad, Jesus, and the first four caliphs of Islam that we saw 2 weeks ago, he was asked to sit on a seat that had the following words inscribed on it in blue light. This is the purest of the Mohammedan stations. He who seats himself upon it is his heir. He has been sent by God to preserve the sacred law. So the synthesis he constructed through his copious writings preserved the precious heritage of Sufi wisdom during a period of rapid decline in Islam's political fortunes. Virtually all subsequent Sufis rely on his work to a greater or lesser extent, even those who strenuously opposed his views. And there's also a more personal motivation. So Jack, maybe you could read this number 17 for us.
Ibn al-Arabi wrote because he was compelled to write, a point he makes repeatedly. The divine unveiling pushed him to the point of exploding, and he could only relieve the pressure by putting down what he saw on paper. At the same time, he who exerted the pressure had several obvious intentions in the writing.
So one of the purposes was to critique the over-rationalization of intellectual studies in his time, particularly in theology and philosophy. But at the same time, he also criticized the widespread denunciation of reason by Sufis. He believed that both of these one-eyed approaches needed to be brought into balance with each other. Okay, so I'm going back to the beginning of my list here. I'm trying to spread the reading around as much as I can. So let me see who's here. Oh, the first person on my list is Durham. So that would be number 18.
Ibn al-Arabi's writings are a critique of a one-eyed approach to interpretation. Reason is only one of the eyes through which we see our way to God. Imagination is the other, and certainly most schools of the Islamic intellectual tradition had pushed imagination off to the side. It was, of course, central to Sufism, but many forms of Sufism denigrated reason to an extent that Ibn al-Arabi could not accept. Such Sufis were, but they saw with the other eye. Ibn al-Arabi's project then involved keeping both eyes open and explaining to his readers how they could do the same. Very interesting.
So this is an appropriate criticism of the West, I think, at this point, that imagination has dropped off completely. So we're so focused on reason that it's difficult to consider religious subjects even, because we just don't know what to do with them. Okay, so I want to step away from the actual writings for a minute and ask, did Ibn Arabi and Jalaluddin Rumi ever meet? Both these towering masters of Islamic gnosis lived in the 13th century. Ibn Arabi died in 1240, Rumi died in 1273. For a period of 4 years, from 1233 to 1237, they even lived in the same city, Damascus. As Chirdik says, it would be indeed strange if there had been no contact whatsoever. While we may never know for certain whether they met face to face, there is evidence of one special connection. During his first pilgrimage to Mecca in 1202, Ibn Arabi met a man called Majd ad-Din Ishaq. 2 years later, they traveled together to Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey. Majd-ad-Din had a son in 1210, whom he named Sadruddin. Sometime after this, Majd-ad-Din died, according to some sources, which are not considered conclusive at this point. Ibn Arabi later married his widow, which means that Sadruddin would thus have become his son-in-law. There is no doubt, however, that about his gradually becoming Ibn Arabi's foremost disciple. This is confirmed by the fact that it was Sadruddin who took over the training of some of Ibn Arabi's disciples when he died in 1240. Sadruddin Kunawi, which the last name means that he was from Konya, which is in Turkey, is generally understood as the most important expositor of the doctrines of Ibn Arabi in the eastern lands of Islam, especially in Iran and India. Okay, so let's see who else we have. How about Margaret? Are you able to read 19 for us?
Yeah, no problem. He can be given more credit than anyone else for determining the way in which the Sheikh, i.e. Ibn Arabi, was read by later generations. This means, among other things, that Kunawi began the movement to bring Ibn Arabi into the mainstream of Islamic philosophy. As a result, he and his followers placed many of Ibn Arabi's important teachings in the background. And from William Chittick.
Okay, so even they were shading the version of Ibn Arabi that was presented. Okay, there is little doubt that all of the followers of Ibn Arabi's school in the East see their master through Kunawi's eyes or the eyes of his immediate disciples. The critical point for our discussion is that Sadruddin was also a close friend of Jalaluddin Rumi. This has led some to wonder if Rumi had come under the influence of Ibn Arabi's teachings. As Sayyid Hossein Nasr points out, some have called the Mathnawi the Futuhat in Persian verse. For his part, Chittick dismisses the idea of Rumi being influenced by Ibn Arabi as sheer speculation. As he says, by the time the two met, Rumi was far too advanced spiritually to come under the influence of friendship, even that of a great master. Besides, none of Ibn Arabi's original terminology or discussions is found in Rumi's works. Nasr himself concludes that Rumi represents yet another approach and particular form of the Sufism of Ibn Arabi, and not simply its derivative. So before we turn to Ibn Arabi's writings on cosmology, it will be useful to compare his style with that of Rumi's writings. On the surface, the differences appear to be profound. Oh, let me see who's here. Oh, how about you, Wayne? You're really getting to work tonight here. So that's number 20. I'll just bring it up a bit.
No problem, Mark. Yeah. Reading number 20?
Yes, please.
Okay. Two forms of spirituality are, generally speaking, aimed at two different types of mentality. Ibn Arabi complicated theosophy.
Theosophy is.
Theosophy, no doubt, grounded in practice the same extent as Rumi's religion of love, appealed primarily to those who had undergone the technical training of Islamic sciences, especially theology and philosophy. It provided sophisticated answers to sophisticated questions.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me see here. Okay, I see we've got several questions. Linda's just given me a note with a huge list of names. Oh, these are the people who haven't read yet. Okay. Sorry, I thought they were all questions. That would have thrown me off. Okay. So Rumi's style of discourse was poles apart from Ibn Arabi's. Okay, so Alan is a person who's on the list that hasn't read yet. So how about you, sir?
Sure. 21?
Yes, please.
In contrast, Rumi's spirituality attracted everyone who could appreciate beauty and music, whatever one's educational level. Rumi employed the most ordinary phenomena and experiences of everyday life as imagery to explain the profoundest levels of metaphysics and spiritual psychology. He also employed a wide variety of technical terms, but these were drawn primarily from the language spoken by the people, not that of the philosophers and the theologians.
Thank you. So for that reason, Rumi's school attracted a much different clientele than Ibn Arabi's. Just as a note, Rumi's disciples referred to him as Maulana, which means our, excuse me, our Lord. This is the reason they become known as Malawis in Arabic or the Mevlevis in Turkish. Okay, so that's to explain the term in this number 22. So, oh, I see Christina is here. I didn't realize you were. Christina, how about number 22 for us, please?
Sure, I had to have a book club, so I was a little bit late. So
no problem.
Yeah, thank you. So reading 22, the Mavlavi dervishes came from every level of society. They ranged from the most educated to the illiterate, the richest to the poorest, the governing elite to the street sweepers. Any Muslim with taste could follow. Yeah, how you say it?
Thou
Could follow Rumi's way, although not necessarily understand the Matnavi. But only a small minority would have the necessary specialized training to understand the doctrines of Islam as expounded by Ibn Arabi.
I hope you're starting to get a sense of the difference between these two and their styles. The following anecdote succinctly depicts the gulf between these two approaches to Sufism. I'm hoping Bonnie would read this one for us.
After listening to Rumi explain a point of doctrine to his disciples, Al-Qunawi asked him, "How are you able to express such difficult and abstruse metaphysics in such a simple language?" Rumi replied, "How are you able to make such a simple idea sound so complicated?"
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Oh, are these people who haven't read, or is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bonnie. I'm just getting notes here. But were they really that different when you look beneath the surface? The French scholar Henri Corbin challenges us to look at their writings in terms of their motivation and goals. Let me see. How about you, Nina?
Sure. It would be quite superficial to dwell on the contrast between the two forms of spirituality cultivated by Maulana, Rumi, and Ibn Arabi. Both are inspired by the same theopanic sentiment, the same nostalgia for beauty, and the same revelation of love. Both tend toward the same absorption of the visible and invisible, the physical and the spiritual, into a unio mystica in which the beloved becomes a mirror reflecting the secret face of the mystic lover, while the lover, purified of the opacity of his ego, becomes in turn the mirror of the attributes and actions of the beloved.
Wow. We could spend quite a while talking about this particular passage. It's a very deep concept, but I don't think we will at this point. It's an early expression of a topic that we will come up against before we go forward. By the way, a theophany is a visible manifestation of God, just in case you need that clarification. So now that you have a sense of the monumental extent of Ibn Arabi's writings, there's a second major hurdle for us to overcome: the tightly interwoven nature of his writings. We could even call them integral as far as their day and age allowed. How about David? David Oak.
Sure, I'd love to do it. Which number?
We're at number 25.
Okay, I'll start right now. His writings pose many difficulties. They are full of allusions of all sorts to esoteric wisdom, and frequently even the prose takes on a symbolic and visionary aura that is practically impossible to fathom. One of the major difficulties presented even by those passages in his writings, which are relatively clear, is the interrelationship of all discussions with everything else. In order to understand one point, one has to understand all points. This is why in traditional circles, it was not uncommon for a master to spend several hours commenting on each line of the Fusus, and a single reading of the text could take many years.
So this may give you a little bit of a sense as to why I had a terrible time writing some of the following classes. It was very difficult to decide what avenue to take through these tightly interwoven concepts. You'll have to be the judge as to whether it makes sense. But I think I've done something that I'm happy with, but it's personal, right? It's my own version. We'll see. William Chittick himself studied the Fusus in this way under the tutelage of Toshihiko Izutsu in Tehran. He and two other postgraduate students began in 1972 and completed the text in 1978. So he knows that book intimately. This is one of the main reasons I've relied so heavily on Chittick's work to guide my understanding of Ibn Arabi. Not only has he been through such intense training himself, but his voluminous writings and translations of Ibn Arabi distinguish themselves from a growing field by their clarity, balanced presentation, and insider knowledge. Now, to end off, I want to introduce you to the Imperial Iranian Academy of Philosophy. In the last class, I drew your attention to the fertile nexus of 13th century Sufism, during which four spiritual giants lived: Attar, Suhrawardi, Ibn Arabi, and Rumi. I find it a curious parallel that a similar confluence of Islamic star power occurred only 45 years ago, albeit on a less exalted scale, this time involving gifted scholars of Sufism. This group worked together on and off in Tehran for 5 years, from 1974 to 79. Since we'll be referring to the writings of 5 of this group's members throughout our studies of Ibn Arabi, it would be valuable to become aware of this unusual gathering. In 1974, Sayyid Hossein Nasr founded the Imperial Iranian Academy of Philosophy under the patronage of the wife of the Shah Banu. This center for the study and propagation of philosophy was thus independent of any university or governmental organization. Now, note in Iran, the term philosophy embraces the findings of mysticism in direct opposition to its Western cousin's stance. So we need one more reader. Let's see who we've got here. How about you, Jennifer? Number 26.
My plan for the academy was to provide an ambience of study and research, but not a degree program. Rather, we would give a certificate to students who either had a doctorate or were about to receive one elsewhere. Our regular teaching staff included Corbin, Zutsu, William Chittick, and myself, as well as a number of traditional philosophers such as Shahibi, Musil, and Harari Yazdi.
Okay. So from 1974 until the Iranian Revolution in 1979, the various members of Academy edited a number of Islamic philosophical texts, including the complete works of Shahabuddin Suhrawardi and several important manuscripts of Ismaili writers. It also published a multilingual journal called Sophia Perennis, which gained international fame in its 4-year existence as a unique forum for the encounter between the philosophies of East and West, as well as tradition and modernism. In the opinion of Parvez Morwij, a highly regarded modern Islamic philosopher, the Imperial Iranian Academy was one of the most vibrant centers of Islamic philosophy ever established. It is impossible to overstate the debt of Islamic philosophy or philosophical scholarship to Nasser. So we will refer on many occasions to the writings of 3 of the Academy's teaching staff and 2 of their brightest students. So there's Sayyid Hussein Nasser from Iran, who's still alive at the age of 87. Henri Corbin from France, who died in 1980. Toshihiko Izutsu from Japan, who died in 1993. William Chittick from the US, who wrote his PhD thesis under Nasser's supervision, who is now 77. And his wife, Sachiko Murata, who was a student from Japan who married Chittick in Iran. She's also 77. So these are the leading authorities we will consult in our study of Ibn Arabi. I have to say I met both Chittick and Murata in New York about 3 years ago at a Ibn Arabi conference. Boy, those guys are bright. Anyway, so that, my friends, is it. I have attached, or I distributed a short bibliography of Ibn Arabi's works. These are the books I primarily worked on as I put together these talks. As you'll see, there are 3 versions of Fusus al-Hikam there and 2 of the Futuhat, as well as several other books.
Mark?
Okay, so I can stop sharing. Thank you.
Mark,
Now,
I have a question.
yes.
You have mentioned that it was either Baha'u'llah or Abdul Baha who made reference to Ibn Arabi, but I forget who it was.
Both, actually.
And was it more than one reference or just sort of in passing, or?
They didn't always use his name, but yes, Baha'u'llah particularly took exception with Ibn Arabi on a couple of points. One of them for a doctrine that has come to be known as, sorry, I'm just sort of spinning here at the moment.
The unity of existence.
That's the one. Thank you very much.
Jude, yeah.
Yeah. Because it was a monistic way of looking at the world. They didn't make a proper he didn't make a proper separation between the essence of God and creation, according to Baha'u'llah. We are going to go into that in some detail at some future point. He also criticized him because of the fact that Ibn Arabi tended to make use of esoteric interpretations, ta'wil, of the Quran in places where Baha'u'llah felt it shouldn't have been used, that the surface meaning was the intended meaning. And so he took that strategy and went too far with it in some cases. But as we'll see, many of the ideas that Ibn Arabi was floating are actually accepted by Baha'u'llah. So if you just focus on the criticisms, you might think he's dismissing him completely, but I don't think it's necessarily true.
Mark, can we say that Baha'u'llah, it is true to say that Baha'u'llah asks us not to give esoteric interpretations to legal texts that give us ritual instructions of how to do something, right?
Correct.
So, for example, when in the Akdas he says, there'll be no manifestation before 1,000 years, Baha'u'llah says, don't tawil it. Don't, I mean 1,000 years. Don't think it just represents a cycle of time or something like that. This is the plain sense of it. It means 1,000 years.
That's right.
But I mean, Baha'u'llah legitimizes esoteric or inner meaning explanations in certain cases, but not in legal. He says, don't do it with, and that's exactly what you alluded to in your comments of the 2 points that Baha'u'llah didn't like with Ibn al-Arabi, not to give esoteric interpretations to legal texts that are straightforward. If he says, wash your hands 3 times a day before you pray in the medium obligatory prayer, he doesn't mean go into a symbolic interpretation of what washing means. He means wash your hands. Something like that.
What part of wash your hands don't you understand? This is COVID. Come on.
That's it.
Just getting ready for this. Harold,
Mark,
you had your hand up, and then Belinda. Harold?
And then Ben.
Oh, who first? Sorry.
You go ahead first.
Okay,
Harold,
yeah.
then Belinda, then Ben.
You know, in some answered questions, Abdu'l-Baha talks about the Ark of Ascent. And so it's section 81 and 82 of some answered questions. And I interpret those as, I understand them to be an appreciation of the Ark of Ascent and a criticism of it, both. So, so far you've been emphasizing the appreciation of it. Are you going to actually point out the limitations of the Sufi interpretation of the Ark of Ascent? In other words, I see a very clear and important critique of Ibn Arabi's concept of the unity of existence and part of the Ark of Ascent, along with lots of appreciation. So, but you seem to be emphasizing the appreciation and skipping over the critique.
Yeah.
And I think both are important, the appreciation and the critique, or else we don't really have a Baha'i understanding of this material.
Yeah. So my intention was to lay out the Islamic version of this subject first, and then come to the Baha'i explanation and see where they make changes. But I think now that you've raised it, it would be a good idea for you to mention some of the points of criticism that are being leveled by the Baha'i faith.
You're going to do it, so I don't want to steal any thunder.
Well,
I think, okay, here's my brief understanding that in terms of the circle of existence, which is, you gave us this chart.
Yep.
I kind of marked it up, this chart you gave us. It sounds like some of the Sufis, including Ibn Arabi and maybe Rumi, are saying we actually ascend all the way up to the second level of existence. In other words, we sort of become one with the will of God. Or maybe that's what it means to be a friend of Muhammad. I'm interpreting, and I think what the Baha'i writings are saying, no, we don't get that high. we don't get that high in the cosmic hierarchy. We can maybe, so in other words, we have to read books like the 7 Valleys and the 4 Valleys, and a couple of, talks by Abdu'l-Baha to see what the limitations of the human condition are. And the reason this is important is in our dialogue with New Age or people who are spiritually oriented but not religious.
Yep.
They love Aurobindo, and they love Ibn Arabi if they know about him, and they like Ken Wilber. And what's missing also, one other thing I'll mention, it's light in ethics. That's my quick way of saying it. It's almost like if you become one with divine will, then you don't have to worry about right and wrong or doing good deeds or building community or being obedient to the covenant. You see, so I'm saying there's a very important Baha'i critique to this material, along with lots of appreciation. That's all. I just think that people should, know that all along, that the Baha'i view of this includes both, and that both are important. I'll shut up. Thank you.
It's good. You're raising excellent points there, Harold. And I am going to make those points at a much later date, unfortunately. So you're probably right to spill the beans now, just so that people have a heads up that, we're not just accepting everything that's being said here, but I wanted to give you sort of the full picture as best
Yes,
I could.
That makes sense.
Before we
Okay.
critique it, but anyway, so we've now got a foretaste of that. Okay, so Belinda and then Ben.
Hi.
Hello.
I wanted to go back to the vision that Ibn Arabi had about the book where it appeared that Muhammad was giving him a book and telling him to make it, bring it out to people.
Yes.
It almost sounded as if he was claiming a degree of validity for this book that's almost like that of the Quran.
Similar. Yep. But he's not claiming to be a prophet, though.
No, he's not, because he's deriving it from a prophet. But I'm just wondering how that would go over in Islamic circles, to claim that degree of validity or divine inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
How it goes over with us too, for that matter.
Well, Durham, I'm going to turn to you as the Islamic expert on that. How do you think that would go over with the other scholars and things?
You make this propaganda that I know anything about Islamic things. So but many Muslims on different levels, they are not in line with Ibn Arabi. They consider him a blasphemous to this extent. Okay.
Yeah.
For example, Shia would like him because he liked Imam Ali, although he's Sunni.
Yeah.
Okay. Like he didn't like Omar, the four caliphate. He didn't like Omar. He didn't like Uthman. He didn't like Abu Bakr, but he liked Imam Ali. So Shia liked him from this point of view, and so on. Many, they think claiming this book himself is a blasphemous. This is how they interpret it, and so on. So let's not think that all Muslims accept. At the same time, the West did not accept him until Henry Corbin discovered, because he doesn't work with reason, as we just understood from the writing. You see, and so on.
Yeah. It's a complicated subject. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
There is a wide divergence of opinion about Ibn Arabi. I have a book specifically on all the critiques that were made of him from day one right on. So he's a controversial figure. But one of the interesting points I find about it is that he, to a large extent, is giving you access to the inside information from a Muslim point of view. He is so deeply steeped in the Quran and the Hadith and the legal tradition, etc. You can count on him to be accurate in what he says about those documents. But his own experiences then take place in the imaginal realm, which we're going to talk about in some detail, because this is one of the main things I want to discuss, because we're talking about the Ark of Ascent. Where do we go from here? Well, according to him, the next world is the imaginal realm. And it has many synonyms there. So even in the Baha'i faith, the next world, this is the world where dreams take place. This is where visions take place. Okay, we have access to this every day or every night. And some of us have it consciously while we're awake. So if you want to know where we're going, read Ibn Arabi to find out. Seriously, that's my point. But there are a lot of people who are not ready to hear that message. And many of them are Muslims. And they feel that he's blaspheming. Okay, Belinda. Oh, or is it? Oh, no, it's David. Sorry.
And then Ben.
Thank you.
And Ben. Oh, sorry. I got to turn to Ben. I've missed him a couple of times. Sorry. Go ahead, Ben.
Go to Ben.
Yeah.
All right, sure. So, because last week, I guess the metal silver was mentioned. So this brought up a lot of thoughts, and then we're talking about a lot of mystical items. So, now I'll give you some context. And it's good that we have my my mother and the Ram on the in the meeting, because my father told me like what happened, I guess, in Baghdad when they were leaving, when they were the basically the Ba'ath party had taken over, and they had confiscated the Hazira. And at that time, my dad had to burn a lot of documents. And he even told me he had a method for burning them. He had to burn a lot of texts, a lot of documents, because so that it wouldn't get in the hands of the authorities. And the nationalists had told him to do this, to burn it. And this was on the advice from the Guardian. They had asked, and the Guardian said yes, to burn this. So what he had told me. Go ahead.
Not the Guardian, Ben. The Guardian was gone by then. It came from the House of Justice.
The House?
Well,
Yeah.
it was the National.
Okay,
the National got the instruction to do it because they didn't want it in their hands. So they had to do it in what they call tanur. Tanur is the clay that was in the Hazira. And I remember that they do bread in it. So Jamal, my husband, my late husband, has to go and burn all the books before they get their hand on it.
Right. So at that, and from my understanding, there was also, I don't know if it was a budget, but they would ask someone from the Iraqi population to go to the bazaar, the market, on the weekends and buy the texts from the covenant breakers, because those were put out openly, and they were circulated. And that's when you would have the pictures of Baha'u'llah, and you had all kinds of things. They were openly circulated. So I've only heard of this twice, and I was hoping maybe if anyone in the group could shed light on it. But my father, because I used to ask him all kinds of questions, and I guess at the turn of the century, the study of alchemy was extremely popular, and this was the transmutation of copper into gold. And even in the Lights of Guidance, it talks about this at some point. And my father had told me that he had seen it when he was, I think, when he was burning all of the documents, and that Baha'u'llah had written this. It was the tablet of gold. And I was wondering if anybody else could shed light of it. So that was the first time I had heard of it. And what it was Baha'u'llah had actually given the formula of how you could turn copper into gold. And he gave it because he said, when we reach the age of maturity, it will be proof that the riches of the world are meaningless. And he will have said, look, like in the 1800s, I gave you guys the formula of how copper would be turned into gold. Now, not only that, now we know, I think that it also says that in the Lights of Guidance, that any element can be turned into another element. Now, the second time I heard about this was when I was in Romania when I was doing teaching when I was 18, and one of the other youth that was there, he was he had originally been at the House of Justice. He was the midnight cleaner, and he said that he had gone into one of the house members. He was cleaning his office, and on his desk he saw this tablet, the translation of it. It has never been made public. It has never been authorized, but it was the actual translation in English of this text from Baha'u'llah, of where he gives a formula. Now, I asked my father, he said I couldn't understand anything of it. He said it was as if you're reading a completely different text, and he said I couldn't understand one thing of it. So I was just wondering if anybody else had. I mean, there's a lot of things my late dad had told me. He said because I guess what it says in the Quran is that they were there, and they actually give a number of civilizations there were on this earth before our present one. And he told me once, he said, you know, Baha'u'llah's talking about a man. He used to have something, it was a light, and it used to shine. It was so brilliant. But he said the Arabic of Baha'u'llah is so literal. He said, I can't make out the text. And this is unauthorized. There's a lot of unauthorized things there. So just a question to everyone, if they've heard of this, and Mark, you spent time with my late father, so I'm sure he must have told you about this, because it was really interesting.
I have heard the stories. Yeah, he did tell me about the stories, but I don't know much beyond that, to tell you the truth. Maybe Durham, who lived in that same city, has heard more about the alchemical dimension of the faith.
You know, at the same time, Baha'u'llah says, when he resolved or explained this issue of alchemy, he said, what is more important is the transformation of the heart of the human being.
Yeah.
And so imagine, Baha'u'llah said, what is this science you're talking about? It's important, you know, to transform the hearts of the people. That's the purpose of my coming to this world, you know. This is how I tell myself, and not pursue this issue of really alchemy. But I don't know much about this whole story of burning books and things like that. I don't remember any of that. I left Iraq in 1970, and so I can't add anything else.
Nina, did you want to shed any more light on this?
No, maybe that Ram wasn't around, but yeah, we were there. We were there. We know what happened, but yeah.
I mean, more Mark, more on that. I mean, just to let you know, and I had, okay, I'll give you some context, and it's actually quite interesting, because this is close to 20 years ago. I was at a conference in Montreal. It was a youth conference, and there was, and I didn't know if I would bring it up, but why not? There was a counselor. Imagine, she was a counselor there, and at night she was talking to all of the youth. And I asked her the question, and I said, what do you think is going to happen in the world, and what do you think is going to happen to Iran because they martyred the Bab and what they did to Baha'u'llah? And I said, and this may be shocking to a lot of you, I said, because we know that the reason the Holocaust happened was because the Jews killed Christ. And she looked,
what?
Yeah, she looked at me with eyes, she couldn't believe what I was saying. she said, how can you say something like this here? I'm going to throw something in the chat. And Jack, I took this from an email you sent to me over a decade ago. I'm going to put it in the chat. It's actually quite interesting. For me, it was really amazing. But, and I'll tell you why exactly. Hang on a sec. Let me.
I'm wondering if we're getting off topic here.
Okay, but what I'm saying,
I have questions from Mary and Harold that I'd like to hear from first. Sorry, Ben, I'm just put that in the chat so that we can see what we're talking about.
Well, just to say that the Guardian, what happened with and my mom can give more. The Guardian, what happened is that the Hazira, they had made it beautiful, and then it was confiscated. And when they went to the Guardian and they said they're going to confiscate the Hazira, the Guardian said, I want them to take it. So to give you an idea that not everything is beautiful, there's another side of the coin. And when I said that they said, how can you say something like this? And I went and I asked Jack, and Jack sent me the quote of what the Guardian had said. So there's a lot of things to be learned, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, and that's why I just wanted if anybody else had heard.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and share that in the chat, and
sure, I'll find it.
We'll see what it provokes. But Mary has her hand up, and as does Harold. I'd like to see what they have to say before we shut it down in 7 minutes. Okay, Mary. Sorry, can't hear you. Sorry, Mary.
Now you can hear me?
There we go, that's good.
In Revolution of Iran, we did lots with our documents and the book. We destroyed that because they told us we didn't want the access to those. And I remember we did a lot. Yes, it's happened. But, we destroy, and they told us how you destroy it, because we didn't have in burning in apartment or some houses, but we didn't want the government access to that. Yes, we did that too.
Okay.
It came to us too. Yes.
Harold and then Jack.
Oh, I'll pass. I think I've already said too much. Thank you. Yeah, Jack.
Well, I don't want to get on the alchemy topic, but it's the first time I heard Baha'u'llah gave the formula for alchemy. Jamal never mentioned that to me. Ben, I'm sure you got it right. I just didn't know that. What I sent to you in an email, of course, I didn't invent anything. If you read the last pages of The Promised Day Has Come, you'll see very clearly there that Shoghi Effendi, and this is not very popular in religious circles, he believed in divine punishment. Sorry, but that's one of his basic beliefs, and particularly he believed that those who persecuted the manifestations of God would suffer for that. Now, what the Guardian was doing in those pages was comparing the Jews to the Muslims. He never said that the Holocaust was the result of the crucifixion of Christ, but he did say that we shudder to think what will happen to the Muslim world when we consider what happened to the suffering of the Jews for 2,000 years because of the crucifixion of Christ. We shudder to think of the fate of those who persecuted not only the Bab, Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha, but also Shoghi Effendi for all of that time. And that was the comparison that Shoghi Effendi made. And what he was trying to point out was that, it's inescapable. If you martyr the manifestation of God, imprison him, torture him, and do all those things, you are simply not going to get away with it. And so what he was pointing out was, as long as the Muslim world continues to oppose the faith, their destiny is not going to be not a very happy one. That's my understanding. But I've never read that the Guardian said the Holocaust was a direct result of the crucifixion of Christ.
Not directly. Anyways, I've shared in the chat exactly this, that I pulled it from an email you sent me about 12 years ago. And it's in the chat right now. And for me, it was really shocking. And then I sent it to the counselor in the States, and she said, "What a beautiful faith where we can all learn from each other."
Yeah, I'm quoting the Guardian there, as you can see.
Anyways, it's a bit off topic, but yeah, there are a lot of texts and things that we don't know. They're there. They haven't been translated. Baha'u'llah, I think he took documents and he put them in the river, in the Tigris and Euphrates, and he said the people aren't ready for this yet.
Yeah. Okay, friends. Are there any further questions or comments to make?
David Erickson had wanted to
David.
come up.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I want to go back to reason and imagination, and just to point out that William Blake was really ahead of his time.
Yes,
because he was very much immersed in the imaginative realm, to the point whereby he recognized reason, but he said that reason actually comes from the imagination, and that the imagination was at the center and reason was at the circumference. And, and I just wanted to point that out. And imaginative vision is one of the phrases that he had. And I myself have learned a great deal from William Blake in that sense. And as a result of that, that's had an effect on my understanding of the writings, or some of the writings anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are going to be spending quite a bit of time talking about this topic and seeing lots of examples of it so that people have a concrete sense of what we mean by that term.
Yeah.
But I don't actually talk about Blake, but I'm aware of him and have a huge respect for him.
Good.
So,
Okay.
One of his phrases was Jesus the imagination.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Mark, I wanted to assure Harold that Ibn al-Arabi is no lightweight on ethics. It's very, very detailed there. We just haven't come across it yet. The Sufis had a very detailed ethical program by which you were supposed to live. So spiritual psychology, they went into it in great depth.
That's good to know. And I think you could say the same of Al-Ghazali and maybe even Rumi. I was talking about current day, for lack of a better term, people who will say they're spiritual but not religious,
right,
and who like the kind of literature we're studying. I'm talking about them.
Oh,
and I think they're a little light in ethics. That's my observation so far. I would love to be shown that that's very wrong. Some of them want to build a planetary community. They talk like that, and they know that politics is important in the sense of decision making, collective decision making, and community building. So not everyone is equally light on ethics, but some people who are attracted to this kind of literature are. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, that's true.
And it's interesting to note, though, that Baha'u'llah does make a criticism of Ibn Arabi on that very point of ethics, because he does criticize him for the idea that once you evolve as an individual to a certain point in the hierarchy of the worlds of God, then you're no longer bound by the laws of the dispensation that you're living in. And Baha'u'llah is emphatically against that idea. Doesn't matter who you are bound by the laws that are given by the manifestation of God.
Did Arabi promote that point of view, Mark?
Not explicitly. It's there, but it's not as prominent as it is in many later Sufis.
Yeah, because that was one of his critiques, Baha'u'llah's critiques of the Sufis, was that they felt, as you well know, they didn't have to follow the law when they got spiritually advanced.
That's right.
Yeah.
So on that downturn, we're going to close off the night, and we'll see you next week. And we will try and give you an individual Zoom meeting link that works ahead of time on Sunday. So we won't have the kerfuffle we did tonight. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in a week.
Thanks to Linda for holding the fort there.
Absolutely.
Linda, our mistress of ceremonies at Zoom. Thank you, Linda.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, it was great to hear you guys.
Oh, yeah. We got that one solved.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, Mark. It's always inspiring to hear you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, what do we got here? Hi, Lori.
Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
See you, Carol.